Welcome back. Today we're going to do a quick one on the new KZ ZS10 Pro 2. This is the previous model, the ZS10 Pro X. Hugely popular model. Tons and tons of people bought this one. It is a very fun, nice set. Very affordable. I think it's about $25 currently on AliExpress. So yeah, this one kind of hit the sound quality, price point, availability, everything going for it on Pro X. So Pro 2 is sort of the newer version, and by newer I mean they threw the newer dynamic driver into it, and they probably use some newer balanced armatures as well. And of course you do get switches on the side now. So but generally the shell shape has actually remained about the same. I don't even know if there's actually a difference. It's probably the same exact shell other than the switches. Faceplate's a little shinier. This is the matte black version, but maybe it is a hair thicker now because of the switches, and some of the balanced armatures may have actually needed a little bit more space. But for the most part, you lost the brass nozzle, and now it's a plastic nozzle, but they're probably really close. Maybe this one's actually a little bit small. Maybe they did actually do that, a nice little upgrade there, made it just a hair smaller. Definitely a hair shorter, but yeah, so very, very close. If the ZS10 Pro X fit you, the Pro 2 shouldn't really be a problem either. So let's look at the graphs real quick, and I'll tell you kind of at least what you can hear that you see on the graph and what you really can't. So the base shelf, so Pro X is as I said, it was the previous model. That is the one in the blue. And yeah, maybe there's a hair difference in the sub bass, but actually Pro X will actually sound a little bit fuller in the sub bass. So I'm not sure really buy that. Maybe I need to remeasure that one. I'm not sure I buy that one, but certainly with the switches in the low position, the green, that is a leaner version of Pro X. I don't know who is buying Pro X to have a lean version of it, but for me, I would stick to 111. That is the one that closely resembles Pro X, and probably how this set in particular sounds better to me. But so new dynamic driver, it definitely has more control. It is a better dynamic driver than what you saw in X, and I'll kind of talk about the difference and where that kind of plays out according to music in a second or two. So as I said, they may have updated the balanced armatures, maybe not. What you're most going to notice is how they've smoothed out the ear gain and pin air and lower treble. And I think that is going to be the major difference. I don't think you're going to hear, this wasn't a Rhapsody or Hydro style version on 3D printing. This is, let's wonder if we can actually see it on here. So if you look, if you kind of squint, you can actually see the sound channel right there. But this isn't the full 3D printing treatment that Rhapsody has or Hydro has. This is more of an adaptation of what they were doing previously. So they updated the drivers. I would call it kind of a half upgrade. They updated the drivers, but not necessarily the full upgrade to their modern 3D printing and their internal audio channel design. That's different than what they were using in the past, and why those sets sound significantly different than these guys. So new dynamic driver, you'll definitely hear a difference there. New balanced armatures or updated ones, you're not going to hear so much, but you are going to hear a tuning change, and this is kind of a smoother version of treble than what you got on Pro X, but definitely not radically different than what you heard on Pro X. So this sheet is pretty much going to, I'm not going to go off script too much on this one, so if you just want to scan it, read it, and move on with your life, I have no problem with that. But yeah, this one's actually pretty, I don't know, straightforward, I guess is what I would say. I think both ZS10 Pro X and Pro 2, they're both really nice sets. Like I said, this was a hugely popular set. This one, probably won't hit the popularity of the other one because the other one's been around for years, and they priced it really well. It's available around the world, and tons of people like it. This one, yeah, it'll kind of get there eventually. It's just going to take some time to get there, but I do think they both hit this classic, fun V-shaped sound. Pro 2, definitely a refinement, newer drivers, cleaner sound, a little bit more clarity, but not radically better than this one. And I think part of it is because of KZ's new 3D printing process. I think when you get this configuration in sort of the newer style shell, I think that will be a much more radical, much more improvement. This was sort of a refinement on a set that was already pretty good, so it's kind of still pretty good. If you do like some boom with your music, I would save the $10 and stay with the Pro X. I think that is a more fun, I guess, is what I would say. But if you're into certain genres that can appreciate the boom, I think you'd stick with Pro X. And we'll kind of talk about that now. So the big question, you use ZS10 Pro X today, daily as your daily driver. Do you upgrade to the Pro 2? And I will say if you listen to hip-hop, EDM, R&B, any of those genres that can really appreciate a little bit more sub bass, a little bit of boominess to your sub bass, I would actually keep with the X. Those of you looking for a cleaner version for other genres, rock, pop, classical, anything that sort of is more balanced as opposed to a bass heavy genre, I would actually go with Pro 2 because it's just kind of cleaner end to end. And if you don't have either set, I would say it's still the same thing. Go with the one, pick the one that closely resembles your music genre or your preferences. If you're an audiophile type and you're part of the audio communities, I think this one is more of nostalgic fun, has some more bass control, and that will definitely bring out more what can be heard with your source. But it's still going to be more of a fun set than a serious set. Like I said, I would wait for the full upgrade as opposed to this kind of a partial upgrade of just updating the drivers and adding some switches. I think that's kind of one step, not quite the full step. And the full step will be, is it a mini Rhapsody or Hydro? And no, this one is possibly they stuck with the same shell because it's super comfortable and people were used to it. But I think it did limit the options on what they can actually upgrade. You couldn't quite get the full 3D printing. So I think keeping the same shell may have hampered what they can really do, or maybe they're going to plan on doing this later. But in my opinion, I think the dynamic driver and smoother tuning, those are more noticeable upgrades than the BAs. If you're looking for a more detailed, more resolving set, I don't think they went after that. I think they just went for a slight upgrade on an already fun, solid set. Switches, do they make a difference? I'd say the Pro X really had the right fun bass level. Like I said, use 111. It's the one that closely resembles Pro X. I wasn't really a fan of reducing the bass level on this one. I think just keep it as fun as Pro X was and kind of move on. Sound, same fun V-shape, just a modernized version of it. And the bass, definitely it's better on a few levels. I think it is a better driver. I think you do get better control, which offers a cleaner, more refined sound over X. The switches, for that 1 minute that you want to hear less bass on this set, I think you can flip the switches and do that, but I did not. Bass control, again, this is sort of a higher level concept, and you have to really think about putting in a new dynamic driver that's a few years, maybe 2 or 3 years, newer, more refined than the older one. What does that really, how does that impact the total sound? And I think the bass control, it really affects the intrusion into the mids and the masking of air, among other things like the boominess. So I think when I listen to these and A-B and back and forth, you sort of notice that this was a really fun set. That boominess kind of intrudes into the mids. There wasn't enough air there. It sounds like a set that was from a couple of years ago. And then when you hear this with just a little bit of bass control and kind of smoothing out that tuning, you sort of notice that little change in the bass actually ripples through all the way in the sound. And I do think the audiophile types are probably going to notice it. Everyone else will say, well, either it's not as boomy or not as fun as the original, but it's definitely a cleaner version of it. And for other genres, it definitely is easier at more critical genres as opposed to the R&Bs and the hip-hops. And I think those are still going to be a Pro X style music fit. The mids, again, still a V-shaped sound. You're still going to need some volume to keep the mids from dropping too far back. The newer driver helps, but there's a point where you click it to the right where it sounds, just in place and fun. Definitely closer to medium volume as opposed to low volume. Again, these V-shaped sets, at lower volume, the mids are going to sound more recessed. They're going to be farther back. You're going to get quite a bass response, especially at 111. So do turn up the volume and things kind of slide in place and the mids come forward. You sort of catch onto the 3K or whatever, wherever this is. That's about 3K. So you do need a little bit of volume to get these two to balance out and in place so this sounds as forward as it should and everything kind of rolls off from there and everything kind of sounds about as it should. But at lower volume, not so much. Definitely a medium to upper style volume is better on this one. Again, this is a more fun, energetic sound, and the details are fine. But I would say the same thing about Hydro. 4 balanced armatures, these tend to be a great value set. But a detailed beast, that's probably not going to happen on 4 BAs and probably not going to happen at $35 in this particular case. But more natural than Pro X. I do think the way they changed the dynamic driver, the way they smoothed out the treble, I do think it actually did bring some of that more naturalness to Pro 2. Maybe it's the drivers, but I think it's more likely the way they smoothed out 2 to 6. I think it sounds more natural in that way. If it sounds too bright or out of balance, you definitely need new tips and C number 9, which we will talk about in a minute. The treble, again, they kind of smoothed out 2 through 6. Maybe it sounds less energetic, but it's less peaky, and that's that just works for me. Combine that with the new bass and dynamic driver, you get a better audible extension. Like I said, what they did on the bass side actually helps out in the upper treble, and that was something that was actually quite noticeable on this guy. Was there wasn't a whole lot of air to it. There's a whole lot of boom to it on the lower side. On the upper side, not so much, and I think they really got that right or better, where it sounds more modern on Pro 2 than it does on Pro X. So stage, again, much better on Pro 2 due to the tuning. Just putting everything in place so there's more balance to it is going to bring better stage, and that's exactly what happens. Pro X definitely sounds, like I said, as an older set, smaller and more constrained. So the higher volume secret. So this is kind of be more of a ramble and story, but when KZ first started doing electronic tune sets, they had this concept that they talked about for a short period of time. They were going to do everything electronically and not use any physical dampers. And that sounds good in theory. I think that was a really good theory. But the reality is it becomes very hard to find the right nozzle material that doesn't sound too bright or allow too much air through. And I think it takes on almost an undampened feel to it, especially at high volume. And as you watch reviews and read reviews of Pro 2, you're going to notice that people talk about the brightness, and maybe it's going to sound a bit harsh. And those are people who tend to listen at medium plus volume. The more you turn this one up, the more you're going to hear, and I call it noise, but it's definitely, it takes on this, so yeah, pretty much what I said. So on some sets with the KZ electronic tuning, it sounds like this underdampened dynamic driver. It's not really pleasant to listen to. It takes on a bright and noisy sound to it. There's just a lot of high frequency noise, and that's where I notice it the most. Is I pulled this one out of the box and plugged it in, and I immediately wanted to EQ, about 15K, 14K, because it sounded like it was just buzzing in my ear. There's a ton of noise out there. And I've actually listened to enough KZ sets to know that's when they tend to put the foam tips in the box, that's probably a good sign that this is going to happen. And the foam tips tend to help with this problem because I think they add just a little bit more pressure around the nozzle, and you get a little bit more dampening, at least a little bit more forward pressure on the dynamic driver, and it tends to soften this effect. Sometimes foam solves it. Sometimes a smaller bore tip will do the same thing. You just need a little bit more pressure in the nozzle to keep the dynamic driver from sounding like it's vibrating or kind of loose. It's kind of a not pleasant sound is how I would say it. But if you have micro pore tape, again, just a tiny bit of micro pore tape, you don't have to cover the whole nozzle. You just have to increase the pressure just a little bit so the dynamic driver sits back in place. And again, at lower volume, you're never going to notice it. It's only when you get past a certain volume, and maybe it's your ear, the pressure in your ear, but they didn't quite put enough, or a material that was dense enough on the nozzle to really keep everything as it should be, to sound as tuned as it should be. So yeah, I don't know what to say other than if it sounds super bright and super noisy, listen to the far upper treble, and it's almost like a night and day difference. You'll try a foam tip, you have micro pore tape or a tuning filter, and then all that noise falls away, and it's almost like binary. It's like it's totally on with it off, and then it all disappears, and you have black background and really nice smooth extended treble with it. So I don't know what other to say than, you just got to play with it and recognize that that's what's happening. Especially if you're a higher volume listener, you'll probably run into it, how it sounds super peaky, and you'll have the urge to EQ it. And if you try to EQ it, it's sort of a kind of a moving target. You'll start playing with the sliders and it'll change a little bit, but not the way that you think it's going to change. And that's your first sign. It's like, well, there's something else going on. It's not just the peak. It's not just the peak that you see out here at 15K. It's more complicated than that. And again, you don't hear it at all on Pro X. And if you go back and forth between the two, this one will sound super noisy in the upper treble. This one will sound quiet as it should. And the point at which you change the tips or put something on the nozzle, you can get this one to sound just like this one. Just needs something, a little bit denser on the nozzle. So that is my piece of advice. If you are a higher volume type and it sounds annoying to you, do that. Try foam tips. That usually takes care of it, or at least lets you know that it's working and that's the problem. So thank you guys again for tuning in, and I will see you next time.